Welcome to the Pastured Pig Podcast, where we share the successes and challenges of raising pigs on pasture. We talk to producers all over the country, from small homesteads to large commercial pasture operations. Whether you're new to pastured pigs or have been raising hogs for decades, we hope you hear new ideas and new perspectives on pasturing hogs. Here's your host, Troy McClung.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. Excited to have another episode out. Seem to be in a little bit of a groove here. I don't want to jinx it, knock on wood, that things are clicking, going well. It sounds like, it's my understanding, we've had a little bit of audio issues. As to get one thing fixed, then there's another issue that pops up elsewhere. And I have to say, it's not really technology as much as it is operator error. I keep forgetting to unmute different tracks as I go to make this live. So if you run into something that sounds funky or you're missing something, then if I'm aware of it, then I've re-uploaded the file. And sometimes if you guys have your podcast apps automatically downloading things, you may be getting the first incorrect version of the file. So if you just delete that and force your app to download it again, then it'll take care of that. Hopefully, we won't continue to propagate mistakes as we move forward here. Updates that are going on here at Red Tool House. I finally have some pig updates, as things have just been kind of laying fallow for a while. So the sows, we're ready to breed the sows, and we're getting I think the sows are at the proper weight they need to. I put them on a little bit of a diet because they're getting a little chunky this last year. And this will probably be the last breeding cycle for these sows. But as it would be, the boars who have been ripping and raring to go for the last year, I'm finally ready to get them into the game and looking to load them into the trailer like I normally do. And they will not have anything to do with getting in that trailer. I have not fed them for 3 days, hoping that food would manage, would lure them in. There's food laying right in the trailer they can walk right up to. But one of the sows is in heat, and I think they can just smell it completely up the valley, even though they're about 300 yards away. And all they want to do is just kind of love on one another and fight one another and do all that type of stuff. They have no desire to come out and get in a trailer. And I just can't convince them that if one of them would get in the trailer, then I could take them to paradise, per se. But that's my issue right now. So today, actually, I'll try again. I'm hoping their stomachs will outweigh all their other influences, and one of them will hop on the trailer. I'm trying to get... I've got two. One I've bred before. That's Mongo, and he's just a big boar. His conformation is incredible. He's noticeably larger than the other boar that we have, Squealy Dan, and he's a little bit more aggressive. And I say aggressive just with the other pigs. He's still a puppy dog around me, but I definitely give him a wide berth. He's a monster of an animal. But Squealy Dan is more chill, and while he's got a little bit smaller conformation, I'd like to still breed him just to see what kind of litters he throws. And this would be the test to say, okay, who are we going to keep? Right now, Mongo's my winner, but I haven't given Squealy Dan a chance, so I feel compelled to at least let him get a chance. But if he doesn't get in a trailer, then he's going to miss that window, and he's going to end up in the freezer. But that being said, obviously I'll keep everyone posted as we see what unfolds there. Upcoming issues, upcoming topics. We've got some things lined out. I'm trying to talk to different breed associations. I think I've found that interesting in talking to some. I've got some scheduled. Some have been kind of pushed back a little bit. But it's interesting to see the perspective of breed associations when it comes to specific pig breeds. So if you are heavily involved in one of the associations, or you know someone who is and want to throw out a line to me to say, hey, you need to talk to so-and-so, or I can represent this association, then please, by all means, let me know. We'll get something scheduled, because I'd like to kind of take a deeper dive into some of these breeds, get into a little bit of the history of some of them, as well as where they are today. As always, don't forget our Patreon if you would like to help support what we're doing here. I appreciate the efforts that people have put forward in supporting us on Patreon, and I can't express enough how much it means to me that people do that. They part with their hard-earned money and really appreciate that. So just here recently, we've added Glenn and Laura. So I thank both of you all for coming on board and supporting the podcast. And as we get more of this put together, there's more ideas of thinking about. If you guys have ideas that are supporters and like to see, hey, we'd like to have this perk or this benefit, then by all means let me know, and we'll see if we can fit that in. If you want to know more information about the Patreon, of course, you can see it in the show notes below. Again, don't forget our Facebook group and our website. All of that information is in the show description as well, or the show notes. So be sure to check that out. Well, today is a first. Today is the first time that we're doing an interview outside of North America. Today we're going all the way to New Zealand, and we're going to be talking with Micheal Peach about his farm. And instead of introducing all the details, the name of his farm and everything, I'm just going to cut away to the interview because I absolutely slaughter the name of his farm. And I dare not try it again because I will just continue to slaughter it. But without further ado, I'm going to jump into the interview, and you guys can get a taste of what's going on, what it's like to raise pastured pigs in New Zealand. And I will catch you guys on the tail end of the interview. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Troy. And today we have a very special podcast. We are going to a place where no Pastured Pig podcast has gone before. We are going all the way around the world to New Zealand. And we're talking with Micheal Peach. He's in Canterbury, New Zealand. And I'm going to slaughter the name of his farm, even though we've tried this multiple times with me. This is what happens when you talk to a redneck. So he is with Petiti Farm. Is that the delay I'm supposed to put in it, Micheal?
It's a little bit more like Petiti.
Petiti. Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not the long E. That's right. You said the A. That's where I misunderstood you when we first talked.
Yeah.
All
It's
right.
the indigenous language of New Zealand.
Very good. Very
Te
good.
reo Māori. Yeah.
All right. So just to bring everyone up to speed, this is the first time that I've ever done a podcast with somebody from New Zealand, or really anybody out of country other than some Canadians. So I have to appreciate Micheal already for putting up with me, because this is our second try. The first try we were doing voice over IP, and that was a white hot mess. So now we're using Zoom, and it seems to be working out pretty good. So hopefully everyone can hear us as we go along. So Micheal, now that we don't have as much delay, when we tried this the first time, we had a little bit of latency there. It was a bit tough to overcome. But I still want to kind of talk about your farm and let you kind of run with it. So first of all, tell us about your farm, kind of the layout, the nuts and bolts of how the farm's laid out, and then maybe a little bit about what got you into pastured pig farming.
Yeah, sure. You sort of run my farm with my parents' land. It used to be one block till about a year ago when we split it in half, and I bought it. Bought half of it. So we sort of run it all together. It's a 20-acre farm. It's just shaped like an L. So Mum and Dad live in the boot, and then it's the long part of the L is just a few paddocks all cut up. I did a quick sort of Google, and I think our land's most similar maybe to Nebraska, sort of type country. So we're pretty flat, right where we are, an hour's drive and we end up in the Alps. But we're pretty flat. And when Dad moved there, 30 years ago, there was I think 6 trees on the property, and so he's planted up quite a few forests and shelter belts and that sort of thing. But by and large, we're just sort of established pasture. That we run cattle and sheep. We've got a handful of chickens, like you do, and just recently, 5 free-range pigs.
Excellent. All right. So this is where my ignorance and fascination kind of collide. So I know enough of New Zealand to be dangerous. So obviously, Lord of the Rings introduced a lot
Yes.
of us Americans to the beautiful landscape of New Zealand. And then recently, in the past year, my wife Kelly, she really likes to watch YouTube channel about tiny homes, and there's one that's, I think it's called Living Big in a Tiny House, and it's located, or it's headquartered out of the host is headquartered out of New Zealand. So he's all over the place, and that's how I learned that there's 2 islands, and there's these really cool names of different places, and everyone talks kind of funny. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is where you are in New Zealand, that it's really, really flat, and not these huge snow-capped peaks that we would see in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, so I don't know if you've ever tried to build a house on a hillside. Well, you're from West Virginia, so you probably have, but
Yeah.
it's certainly more difficult than building on the flat. So by and large, those wonderful snow-capped Alps and dense bush, there's not a whole lot of people live there. So we're in the boring part, the good farming country, I guess you could call it. Yeah, but the nifty thing about New Zealand is everything's so close. So I was saying, an hour or two's drive, and I'm in the middle of the Alps, and another hour after that, it's like I'm almost in island, dense bush, jungle. It's so varied so quickly. So
Yeah.
That's always something to keep in mind.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So obviously, and again, I know most people listening know this, but I just want to remind everyone. So obviously, Southern Hemisphere. So you guys are all upside down right now. No, that it's wintertime for you right now in New Zealand, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So what type of winter? So if this is August, then I would say August would be the equivalent of my February, I would guess. So you're probably in the deepest part of winter, starting to come out of that. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, for us, August is probably the coldest month. So the grass doesn't sort of start growing again till September sometime. We've just come out of, I think, the wettest July on record. So where I live, I'm just a little bit out of Christchurch. That's sort of our major city, and I think they average about 60 mils. So what's that, 2.5 inches of rain for July every year, and we've just had, I think we've blown the 200. So I'm now got to try and work that out. What's that? 8 inches easily, just right out of the park in July. So
Wow.
we're wet. And fortunately, we don't get too cold. I think probably some of our climate is similar to Oregon. It's much more mild because we're so close to the coast,
Yeah. So that keeps you from having a real heavy freeze, even though your latitude is pretty high. So if it was if it wasn't an island, then you'd be dealing with probably more of a northern America or even central Canada type climate. But because of the sea, it really helps keep that more temperate, like you said, like the Pacific Northwest that we'd be familiar with.
Yeah, I don't think there's any part of New Zealand that's more than about 100 miles from the coast. So. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, this is fascinating. Obviously, I could sit here and talk about New Zealand geography for a long time. That fascinates me, but that's obviously not what the podcast is about. So I want to talk a little bit about the farm, and then for people listening, so you guys can kind of follow the method to my madness here. When we were doing pre-screening stuff, Micheal was telling me some of the nuance associated with pastured pigs in New Zealand. So we're going to get into that. So while we do want to talk specifically about his farm, we do want to talk about nationally what pastured pig farmers in New Zealand are dealing with. So we're going to get that from Micheal's perspective and just some of the uniqueness that's different from what we experience here in America or in North America. So let's do this, Micheal. So you've given us a little heads up. So we're talking about 20 acres that you share with your parents, and that you guys have your polyculture. So you've got cattle, you've got sheep, you've got the chickens, or do you guys call them chooks, or is that just Australians that call them chooks?
No, we call them chooks.
All right.
New Zealand grabs everyone's lingos. Everyone's lingo, yeah. So with the chooks, the chickens, the hens, whatever you want, really.
Love it. All right. I'm trying to refrain from doing my Mick Dundee because that, again, being a child of the 80s, that's where I first heard that Australian accent. So And I know you're not Australian, so that's the other thing. Is how offensive is it when is it offensive to be referred to as an Australian when you're a Kiwi?
I think the best analogy is if you got a person from every country in the world and put them all in a bar fight, the New Zealand and Australians would be on the same side until right at the end when we'd turn on each other. And so they're like, I think, I talk to foreigners and I think, oh, what an Australian accent. And, you just roll with it because,
right.
But you can't expect everyone to know the nuances. But if another New Zealander calls you an Aussie, that's probably the worst thing they could call you.
Right. I bet. Yeah. That's like us in Virginia. Everyone, when we say we're from West Virginia, then they pick a Roanoke, which is a large town in Virginia. They say, "Oh, well, I've got an aunt or an uncle that lives in Roanoke," and it's like, "Yeah, that's great. It's a totally different state. It's not even." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, West Virginia's its own state." So yeah, I can feel your pain there. Yeah. But all right, so I'll refrain from any Australian comments or associations going forward here. So man, this. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I wasn't going to add anything of value.
Yeah. All right. That's what I'm doing right now. This podcast has digressed tremendously. So let's get back on tap here. So a 10 acre or 20 acres that you share with you folks, a polyculture. And I love this idea that your father came in and planted trees and recognizes the benefit of that, especially if the ground is as flat that you say. So you've got the windbreak, you've got shade and all those type of things. So tell me why pigs? So did you all? It sounds like you probably started with ruminants first. What got you into deciding, hey, we're going to put pigs on here and we're actually going to range them?
Yeah, sure. So the thing is, I've grown up on this land my whole life. I left a little bit for university, and my first job was up in the North Island of New Zealand. I've just come back about a year ago now. Oh no, 2 years. Been back 2 years, and so growing up, we had cattle and sheep running around, and then the chickens for the eggs. And Dad had a job in the city, so the lifestyle blocks, that's what we would sort of call these little small farms, lifestyle blocks. They were sort of his outlet a bit, and cattle and the sheep run around, and we got a pig that lived in the sty for a bit. And the interesting thing, I don't know if this is something that you're allowed to do in the States. It's certainly been banned since. But he would put a bit of wire through the pig's nose, fold it over on itself and twist it, and it just stopped the pigs from rooting. And so, the pigs would be in the sty for a bit, and you'd let them out, and they'd run in the paddocks like a cow. So that was sort of my upbringing for many years. When I was about 13 or 14, I got a job at the commercial pig farm down the road. I was water blasting, so that was an afternoon a week or so, just out there water blasting and hanging out with pigs, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Yeah. And then since around that time, we stopped having pigs of our own. We just buy a pig from this pig farmer. So that was sort of for 10 years, we haven't had pigs on the land. But when I came back 2 years ago, I love pigs and so much about them. And so I was quite keen to have them, for my own children to experience and interact with and eat, because that's probably the primary point of a pig.
Exactly, yes. They are quite tasty, yes.
So, and I was quite fortunate in with my pigs. So, in terms of feed, I know that there's lots and lots of discussions on feed and what to feed them and how to feed them. But I know someone who works at an apple juicing plant just down the road, and so I was able to source trailer loads of half-rotten apples. And, you turn up and dump a trailer in the paddock and get the pigs at it type thing. So it was quite... it was probably something that I experienced that most other people wouldn't. And then the pig farmer down the road, he was able to source me with feed when I needed it as well. And yeah, then just the grass and the paddock.
Very good. Very good.
While I ran.
Yeah. All right. So you said a couple things there that I want to circle back around on, and it's interesting. So the first thing that you said that in New Zealand it's unlawful to wring a pig's nose, and that's what we call it here, putting the rings in, and I know that's not unlawful here yet, but I agree with that. I'm not a guy that wants laws, but I agree with not doing that simply because it removes the pigness of a pig. But it is interesting.
Yeah.
I know that's you go back to 2-3 generations in our area, and that would be very common because people just didn't want the ground torn up, and it's like, well, we're gonna do this, and it's gonna save on the ground. And again, I believe a pig was created with a shovel in its face, and it's kind of a shame not to let it use its shovel. No matter how hard it is to clean up after sometimes. So it sounds like you've had a background in pork. You've been around them, even worked at some side jobs there or a main job as working at a commercial operation. So how did the transition just go that since you all had the land and you had the pasture that you're like, well, I'm not putting this pig in a sty. We're not putting it on concrete. We're actually going to let it enjoy the pasture grass. What was that? Something you already were familiar with, or something you wanted to experiment? What was that? What was that switch that flipped there?
So one of the things about the New Zealand farming industry that I think is quite different. This is certainly my impression, and there's some validity to it, but I'm not sure the extent. Is basically most animals, apart from pigs and chickens, so the cattle, the sheep, the deer, they are all pasture raised. It would be very rare to see, a fattened cattle beast that has grown up like it ended up in feedlot under shelter. I would say something like 95% of all meat, red meat, is what we call pastured. And so, I've worked on a couple of different commercial pig farms, and I worked for New Zealand's largest poultry producer for a number of years as well. And so, inside the barns, it's something I was familiar with, but sort of goes against what New Zealand's expectation of how an animal raised is meant to be. So when I want to get pigs of my own, my first thought was, well, I want them outside because I know it's possible. I've listened to enough of your podcasts to know the benefits in it. And so for me, that was quite natural. So we went to put the ring in the nose, a bit of wire in the nose, to let them run on the paddocks. Because like many people, don't want the ground torn up. And it was just a trade-off, if I was a pig, would I rather run around outside and eat grass, but with a ring in my nose, or in a concrete pen without? And for me, that's a simple decision.
Yeah.
And it was only after I put the ring in the nose I found out I was liable for like a $10,000 fine. So I had to go take the ring back.
Out comes the ring.
Yeah, that's right. I was like, guts. And so at that point, my parents were keen to lock them up in a sty. They were like, well, going to have the pigs running around, ripping up the ground. That's unacceptable. But we had a small paddock. Now I've got to try and do the conversion. Maybe a quarter of an acre, half an acre type area that we ran the pigs in. And I was willing to sacrifice it, more just to try it out and see, what a truly sort of, not a truly free-range pig, but quite a free-range pig, what that would be like. So, that's how we sort of ended up there. My parents, once we took the ring out, they wanted to, like I say, put them in a sty, but I wanted to try this free-range thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting balance, and I can appreciate that, especially with obviously with the ruminants. So when you got 20 acres, you've got good pasture for your ruminants. It's like, well, the last thing I want is a pig going through there and tearing all that up, because that obviously causes complications elsewhere. But I like the idea. I like that you came to this conclusion. Okay, the sacrificial area. We have the sacrificial area in the wintertime because nothing's growing. It gets snowy, icy, all those type of things. So it's best to have them tear up a small spot than a large spot, and then of course you rotate them more when we're in the warmer months and we actually have forage growing. But so it's interesting. You'd mentioned that with the planting of the trees that your father planted and kind of the trees around that area are more of conifers and gum, so they really don't produce a nut or any type of protein. What protein producing trees do you have in New Zealand? I mean, are there oaks and those type of things as options, or hickories, or what do you got over there?
Yeah, so we've got the native New Zealand bush, which has a wild pig population, and there's not really nut producing trees there. There's a few sort of berries, but it's mostly just green foliage. And then most exotic trees, because you've got to remember New Zealand's really only had Western civilization here for about 150 years in any sort of shape or form. So most exotic trees that are planted these days, they're not like out in the fields and stuff. It is mostly radiata pine, would be probably the most commonly planted tree, and that is pretty poor when it comes to feeding a pig.
Yeah.
Unless they like pine needles.
Right.
Yeah, and so there are blocks of land around with oaks on it, but they're old oak trees and they're few and far between, and they're around the old homesteads type thing. There's not many around, not at all like sort of the New England forest. We've got nothing,
Right.
Absolutely nothing to that effect.
Gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about your breed. So with starting with these 5 pigs that you had, what breed are we talking, and where did you start, and kind of why did you go in that direction with that breed?
Yeah, I when I was trying to source some pigs, I was able to jump on the local website. Trade Me is what it's called. It's probably like your Craigslist type thing.
Yeah.
And there's a handful of pigs, weaner pigs up for grabs, but nothing that was sort of, I don't know. I guess maybe this is coming from a commercial pig farm. He was always talking about the quality of genetics is paramount to the performance of a pig. So in the end, my old boss, he managed to source me a couple of pigs from another farmer. My old boss, he's gone out of business. But he put me in touch with a friend of his. So I bought a couple of weaner pigs from him in early September 2021. And I say weaner pigs, but they were, what do you say? They were like 9 weeks old. Yeah, 9 weeks old. So they were pretty big girls at that stage. He reckoned that was September, that if I kept them in a pen and fed them as much food as possible, they'll be ready by Christmas.
Right.
Which I didn't have the heart to tell him I was going to put them out in the paddock. He'd be like, no, that's not how you raise the pig. Right. But yeah, so I got a couple from him, and there was some delay in our communication. So I reached out to my stock agent and said, can you source me some pigs? And so within about 15 minutes of each other, I said yes to these 2, and then the stock agent called up, and I didn't want to say no, so I ended up with 3 piglets just from the local sale yards.
Yeah.
And those 3, they were little pipes. Sort of what I was expecting for a weaner pig. And all 5 of those were like a commercial hybrid, white commercial hybrid, not heritage breed type at all.
So how did they do that first year? So you said that was about 11 months ago. So how did they do through your warm season?
Yeah, so they did quite well. The great planner that I am, I had boys and girls, so I had to try and keep them separate, which added complications. But my two good pigs, I'll call them, they grew fast. You could almost see them grow after, put a trailer load of apples in. They just sit there and eat, and they just, you could see them grow, which was great. And that, I think I knocked them on the head early February this year, and they were like maybe 200 pounds. 200 pound carcass weight.
Okay.
Or maybe that's hanging weight. I don't know, something to that effect. We got like 80 odd kilos, so 180, maybe 180 pounds of meat off each of those two big pigs. Yeah. And that was beautiful. That red. It was quite lean meat. Yeah. Which I was happy with that. And then the three pigs, I was not happy with their growth, and so I fed them more barley. And near the end, I was basically just throwing feed at them because I wanted them to sort of a certain size by the time autumn came along and it got cold. So when they got killed out, they were a bit smaller, maybe 50, 100, 110 pounds of meat per pig. But that was really fatty. I was quite taken aback with the amount of fat and just the comparison between a pig of probably superior genetics eating much more pasture and apples compared to a slightly poorer pig of the same breed, even fed more barley. You've got like a half-inch fat cap on the lean pigs and a 2-inch on the other ones. So that was quite a comparison that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, that's a pretty obvious difference there. Like you said, with the same kind of the same diet, same pasture, same access. So it definitely shows the difference in the genetics there. So you're looking at kind of scaling up this year. I assume you haven't done that yet, but I think in your pre-screen you said considering adding 10 pigs. Are you still looking at that same source where you had the good produced, or are you looking at broader options there?
I was sort of considering the 10 pigs. I was going to run them under the trees that we have, just more from a shade perspective, and was putting together my figures around that, the budget and getting all properly lined up. And my wife said, no, that's not happening, darling. You needed in the house with the children, and out there running around after pigs for an hour a day is not acceptable. So I think we're just going to do 3 this year.
Very good. Yep. Yeah. No, I can definitely understand that. Definitely, kind of get your legs about you, get things taken care of, and keep the family happy, right? Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Very good. Yeah. So you've said something interesting in the pre-screening, and this kind of maybe is a segue as to your source options when it comes to the genetics you're looking for. So what type of how many pastured pig farmers? I don't know, you don't know this number, but are there a lot of pastured pig farmers in New Zealand? Is this something that's very common? Is pork really popular in New Zealand? How does all that lay out?
Yeah, so I was New Zealand imports about 60% of our pork meat, and I think that largely comes from Canada and maybe some of the Asian countries. But we import 60%, and New Zealanders only on average eat about maybe 19 kilos. Oh, what's that in pounds? 40 pounds. 40 pounds of pork a year. So I sort of look at it and I go, we're not big pork eaters. And when I say pork, mostly people just try and eat the bacon, and that's about it. And we import a lot. So in terms of local pig farmers, there's not as many around as you would hope. Yeah. So I was looking at our local county equivalent, and there's only one commercial pig farmer in the county, and we are in the South Island is the pig producing area of the country as well. So it's quite limited There's lots of people on like little homesteads, for lifestyle blocks. I think I see.
So do
kind of get.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can kind of get. Yeah, it's hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, my internet connection hiccuped a little bit there, but yeah. So get the gist of that. It's tough to find a lot of producers in that area. So I guess that probably makes the next question kind of obvious then. So when it comes to looking at heritage genetics, there's probably not a lot available in the area, even in the entire country. But are there restrictions, I assume, as far as even bringing in genetics? Is that something where you say, hey, I got a couple gilts and I'm going to order AI opportunities? And my goodness, how do you think what that would cost to have that internationally shipped? So what type of issues you run into there when you're dealing with regulation of the government and heritage breeds?
I'm not terribly familiar with that.
Okay.
In accurate detail, New Zealand's got some pretty stringent rules around importing, like for biosecurity reasons. We're effectively a little island at the bottom of the world, and so we don't have a lot of disease problems. And so they're quite keen to keep it that way. So unless you are probably the commercial guys, they've got the access routes to get some of that genetics in. So I wouldn't even try to bring in semen. I'm getting a headache thinking about it. Trying to think of the rules and hoops you'd have to jump through. Yeah. So, but like I had looked at Berkshire. I thought, that was quite cool. But I think there's only, and now I say it, they'll jump up and down and say that I got it wrong. But I think there's only about a dozen Berkshire breeders in the country in terms of what the Berkshire New Zealand page was saying. And so, it wasn't something I went for this time. I had effectively easy access to commercial hybrids, so that's the route I took, and I probably will continue to take, unless convinced otherwise, to be honest.
Yeah. Now you'd mentioned something about a wild boar or wild pig native in New Zealand. I don't know. Is that originally native? Did we Europeans bring that over? And is that something that anybody uses? Do they try to hybrid with that? Are those a nuisance animal? How do those fit into the environment there?
Yeah, sure. So they were brought in by Captain James Cook, who was one of the early explorers in this part of the world. And so there are wild pigs. They sort of up in the hills and in the bush, and they sort of only really cause a problem for the farmers that border them. And wild pig hunting is a pastime of you often find them in young rural areas. The young guys head out pig hunting this weekend. And they've got their dogs and they're out finding pigs, but they're not a real issue to anyone's day-to-day life, except a handful of a few hundred farmers probably. And you wouldn't want to include them in your genetics by any means. A friend of my sister's caught a little wild piglet and had nowhere to put it once it grew a little. So it ended up with my 5, and it started off about the size of a small dog, and after 2 months of feeding it unlimited barley a day, it ended up the size of a small dog. And
Exactly.
and so at one point when we were getting our pigs butchered, I said to the man, just want to make this one disappear as well. That'd be great, because there's no benefit in it for me at that point.
Yeah. He's not earning his keep at all, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, Michael, you'd made a comment, or you'd mentioned something about a circumstance that you're dealing with in New Zealand. It's between the zoning rules, environmental concerns that are pretty tight, and then this duopoly that you talked about. You mind sharing that with us a little bit? What you see from your experience there in New Zealand?
Yeah. So the environment, like if you wanted to try and scale from, like say I want to go from my 5 pigs a year to 500 or 5,000, free range pigs, and make it a, in some ways this would be my goal, but make free range pork New Zealand's #1 pick for meat. To do that would be quite a challenge, and I think more of a challenge in New Zealand than other places around the world and perhaps the US. And that is there's a duopoly at the retail end. We just have 2 major supermarket brands, and there's been a big government inquiry into them due to the fact that, and the government's kind of had to admit it, that the New Zealand consumer is getting ripped off by them. The supermarkets are able to sort of set the price to suppliers, and there's not as much negotiation available as what would be healthy. And so that sort of puts you on the back foot in terms of you're trying to charge a premium price for your premium product, so to speak, because they've got purchasing power and you don't have much to negotiate with. So that's one challenge. And then New Zealand is by and large, believe in, we've got this clean green image to protect, and the level of legislation and compliance costs around the environmental impact of a farm has risen and has continued to rise at quite a rate around what you can do and how you can do and when you can do certain things on your land. So I was looking up this morning just to try and get some more specifics, but for my region, which would be similar across all of New Zealand, any sort of pig farming is sort of classified as intensive farming, and you could debate, and there's probably room to debate with the authorities that free-range pig farming doesn't count as intensive. But the moment that gets classified as intensive, which pork is just always, pork and poultry, that's intensive. You've got to jump through all sorts of rules to be allowed to farm it. So even on, designated farming land, you've still got to prove beyond, some level of doubt, that you should be allowed to farm that. And all it takes, and you're in a real tight spot. And just to say that, my neighbour growing up wanted to raise pigs, and my parents said, no, we don't want the smell, and just like that.
Yeah. Wow.
Pork farming, pig farming, big in New Zealand. You've got that hurdle on top of, even if you can produce the pigs, even if you could sell them at a reasonable rate to these supermarkets, you'd be struggling to even be able to find some land in which to raise that.
Yeah. Interesting. So, what's that look like scalability? Is that for where you are? Do you just stay with raising enough for your own personal consumption? Do you have a small level commercial where you can raise some for other people and sell wholes and halves or cuts? How does New Zealand handle that option?
Yeah, and that's almost a kick in the scalability. We have, that's going to start to sound like a broken record. We have some really tight legislation and rules around, like selling animals, other animals, but an animal for slaughter. So there's something called like the home kill scheme, where you can have, you can kill an animal yourself. That's not a problem, but it's not allowed to be fed to people outside of your home. Which, sure, why not? So that sounds like an okay rule. And then you can get mobile guys come around in their little truck and they'll kill the animal for you, gut it, skin it, take it off to the local butcher. And that's called home kill. And that's also, while it gets processed by a butcher, it's not allowed to get fed to people outside your home. It's not allowed to be sold retail, to retail. You can't even, a cashy, by the book, that's illegal. And so the only way to be able to sell, you can't even do wholes and halves. The only way to sort of get around that is you've got to go to, the approved abattoirs. And I think in my whole region, and, we're probably the largest agricultural area in the country, my whole province, I looked it up and I think there's three. Yeah, there's three places, you can take it and it gets the effective of the USDA inspectors there. And so once you start trucking pigs for 4 or 5 hours, I've fortunately got one that's not too far, it's only about an hour and a half away. But once you start doing that, you probably start to lose what makes a free-range pig in terms of a calm environment, when it finally gets shot.
Right.
Yeah. And so I've got my local butcher. He was actually very kind. He was able to give me the contact details for these guys and talk me through what that process was going to look like. And so when I was looking to do maybe 10 pigs this year, I was able to plan and budget that in. But it's not something that like many people have found when you try to sort of scale it up. It's not something that is easy, and the system's not there to make it work.
Yeah, it sounds like there's quite a few hurdles there that would keep that from being as financially sound as it needs to be to justify all the work that goes into it. So that definitely is kind of a pretty good roadblock there.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So like I've heard of there's someone, I think he's from the States, or his parents are from the States, maybe an hour and a half away from me. His parents had planted out some acorn and hazelnut and some other sort of nut trees 30 years ago, and so he's running purely free-range pigs now, and they eat those nuts as part of their diet. So that's one person who sort of managed to make it. My understanding is he probably wouldn't do more than a couple of hundred, or maybe 100 pigs a year. And I've heard of one large free-range pig farmer, but I wasn't sort of able to verify that. So there's not really a proper free-range pork available on the New Zealand market.
It sounds like there's probably a decent amount of education that has to take place too with the consumer to understand the benefits of free range and why that would cost more exponentially compared to what the supermarkets are producing. So that sounds like that would be a pretty good obstacle as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so and I want to be sensitive to your time. It's tomorrow, actually, is my understanding, if I understand time zones right. So it's tomorrow. So I'm glad I'm talking to you. You can kind of tell me if it's worth me getting up in the morning or if tomorrow's going to be a good day or not. So
today's a lovely day.
Very good. All right. So something to look forward to. So So Micheal, let me ask you this. So you mentioned that you were thinking about going to 10 pigs, but right now the family's kind of pump the brakes. Let's maybe do 3 next. Where do you see this in 3, 4, 5 years? Yeah, how much pastured pigs or free range pigs play a part in your farm?
I think there's an argument to say that they'll always be there. The quality of the product that they produce is just superior to anything that you can find elsewhere. So there's always that, I guess, the inherent want to have a pig there. I work in the accounting field, mostly because I'd like to be a farmer, but it costs too much to buy a farm here.
Right.
So looking long term, in 10 years' time, if we were able to secure maybe another little bit of land, a bit bigger, maybe 50 acres or so, I would like to give raising free-range pigs a go. Try and make something of it. There's certainly people out there who like it. Friends who I did give a packet of bacon to. They're saying this is really good stuff.
Right. Yeah.
So part of me goes, I'd really like to try and make a go of this. I think I said earlier, I want more. Well, I'd really like to see free-range pork being the number one pick for the New Zealand consumer. But in all reality, I think that will probably sit at around three pigs a year, and maybe when my children are a little bit older, we'll get a gill.
Yeah.
Have a few more. Just while they're at that age to really appreciate piglets and experiencing that. But
very good.
Reality gets in the way of dreams.
Well, yeah. I mean, and there's prudence and wisdom in recognizing that maybe now's not the time to jump headfirst into something and build into that when that time comes, and it could be a different season of life. So yeah, I think that's wise to look at that and say, well, let's get this out of the way first, or let's get the kids a little older, whatever the case may be, before you make that big move.
Yeah.
So obviously I have to close out with asking you the question I ask everyone. So in New Zealand, where everything's upside down, what is your favorite part about raising pigs on pasture?
One of the things that I've got an immense joy from is watching my 2-year-old daughter. Every time she walks past the pigs or stands at the window, she's pointing and she's going, pigs, Daddy, pigs. And kids love them. Kids just love pigs. And kids just love everything, to be honest, in all fairness. But watching the children just be enamored by the pigs, and then getting to provide pigs a life that, comparative to many of their colleagues, is a good life. Eating grass and sitting in the shade and just being a pig. That's what I enjoy. I enjoy getting to be part of that whole journey.
Yeah.
There's elements of it, or we talk about, these pigs only have one bad day, and I like to think that that's true. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Well, man, that's great. That's great. So, do you have any web presence if anybody want to find out more about you, or is that something that's yet to come?
No, we're probably a little too small scale for that at this point in time.
Yeah. Well, very good. Very good. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and I appreciate you being patient with me as we figured out the technical issues of communicating halfway around the world. And man, I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
All right. Well, I pray you have a good week. Take care. Well, I really appreciate Micheal coming on the podcast. I think for using technology from the bowels of the Appalachian Mountains to reach all the way to New Zealand, the quality wasn't too bad there. There was a couple little hiccups and some issues, but I think all in all, I hope that was still entertaining for you all. Really neat to kind of get a different perspective and see what's going on in other countries when it comes to pasturing hogs. Well, again, if you have a topic or a subject or you'd like to be on the podcast, by all means, reach out to me. Let me know. You can just email me, troy@redtoolhouse.com. You can use the form at thepasturedpig.com and put your information in that way. There's quite a few ways you can get a hold of me there, actually. So feel free to do so. Let me know. Again, appreciate all the Patreon support. Those of you guys that are doing that, I just can't thank you enough. That really helps, keep me motivated, and of course, helps cover the cost. We're actually making a larger investment. Cam and I, my son, he uses a computer as well. We're actually upgrading our computer so we can do a little bit more. We're running against some issues with our old Mac. It's it's almost 9 years old. So we've just upgraded that. So anxious to get that in, and your all's Patreon support allows those type of things to happen. So we appreciate it. Well, I pray everyone have a great week. Take care.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. To learn more about our podcast or to submit topics or recommend guests for future episodes, visit redtoolhouse.com.